Excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. I was reminded something I heard that when Martin Heidegger was giving his lectures in Germany in the 1920s, people would get to the lecture theatre at 8:30 in the morning for a 4 o'clock lecture because they didn't want to miss it. So the fact that we're actually starting on time, we've got some people in the room, I'm really pleased about that. So thank you for that. So I'm Gary Kass, and I'm going to be, it should have the word towards in front of this, of course, because you can never quite understand this stuff. But what I'm going to try and talk about today, well, first of all, I'm going to introduce myself because I'm a very recent member of SCIO, but I've been working in systems and sustainability kind of things for a long time. And talk about an effort that I'm undertaking to try and understand the impact of policy influencing in the environment sustainability space. And then really just to try and learn from you guys as well, and maybe recruit some fellow travellers on the journey. So I'm a former public servant. That's such a good thing to say, honestly. I was at a meeting once where somebody next to me described themselves as an ex-civil servant, and I went, I'd love to be able to say that. Now I can, so it's great. I worked in the Houses of Parliament at the Post, the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology. I led the Energy and Environment Programme there. I worked in the old Department for Trade and Industry as the head of public engagement around science and engineering, and worked in DEFRA as the Deputy Chief Scientific Advisor. In DEFRA for a little time, worked with Chris Sabbin here, and within Natural England as a government agency where I was Deputy Chief Scientist and Head of Foresight and Innovation, which was fabulous. I currently work with the Institution of Environmental Sciences, which is the professional body for environmental scientists, which I'll say a little bit more, and I chair their policy committee, and that's the focus of what I'm going to talk about. I'm also a visiting professor in sustainability science, policy and practice at Imperial College and Surrey University. Work as a consultant for a small company called Socially Adept. We're developing this approach called Generative Futures. And I saw David was in the room, so I thought I'd just make mention of how brilliant Foresight is, because that's at the heart of this. And I also do endpoint assessment for 2 apprenticeships, which is the systems thinking one through SPA, and also sustainability business specialist level 7 apprenticeship via Cranfield, just up the road from here. And there's lots of interesting touch points between the two. So my situation of interest, so the Institution of Environmental Sciences is a professional body for environmental scientists. We have more than 6,000 members across 55 countries, spanning multiple sectors and multiple membership grades, from students all the way up to very well established senior and very senior fellows. I chair their policy committee, and the committee is sponsoring a project to try and help the policy team to understand the impact that it's having. So part of the strategy of the IES is to be influential in policy, and in order to be able to demonstrate to the governing board that they are doing so, we have thought that we ought to try and find out how we can do that. But it's a very VUCA world out there. For those of you not familiar with VUCA, it's volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And it's getting more and more so all the time. So we need to kind of really look at the world as it is, not how we would like it to be. And again, we kind of want to take a critical realist approach to this evaluation and really situate it and understand what impact is happening in what situations, through what reasons, for whom, and all that other stuff that goes with critical realist evaluation. And not just go, is it working, yes or no? And also to take a systemic evaluation approach, which really embeds impact assessment as a learning process to help drive innovation. So that's really what we're trying to do. We inevitably have very fuzzy boundaries, very varied interrelationships to deal with, multiple perspectives and multidimensional dynamics. So we've got the whole lot really in there. As I said, we've got this very diverse membership. What the members think policy is and what policy impact looks like is extremely varied. Some of them have turned around and said, well, it's just nice to know you're doing it, just carry on. Because they're paying for it, because it's a membership subscription model, and others are saying, well, what are we getting for our money? So we've got quite a variety of different interests in there. The policy work itself is very varied, from sort of just putting out information into policy circles and hoping it has some kind of diffuse effect, through to actually, essentially lobbying and meeting with ministers and senior policy officials and that kind of thing. As I say, it is part of the wider vision, strategy and theory of change for the whole institution as well, so it is kind of embedded within that, and that's just internally. Externally, the environmental policy world is very messy, very dense and very dynamic, changing all the time. There are enormously varied interconnections that the institution has with similar bodies, because there are lots of other environmental professional bodies, but they tend to focus on particular topics or particular subject areas, like air quality or whatever. And the IES tries to be a bit more broad church than that. And some of those interconnections are quite isolationist. They don't want to talk to us and they don't want to engage. Some can be quite cooperative and some can be quite competitive, actually, in quite destructive ways sometimes. We've recognised, given this mess, this complexity that we're faced with, that it really is impossible to try and attribute any particular policy outcome and then the outcome of the policy to what we're doing. That just couldn't happen. You couldn't say we have cleaner air because the IES did this. That would be an impossible thing to say. We could be able to say, however, that we have contributed to a policy environment in which the policy has shifted towards trying to drive towards clean air, which then has to be delivered by a whole bunch of other agents further down the chain. So this question of attribution versus contribution is right at the centre of what we're trying to do. So we're very much thinking about our contributions to intermediate outcomes rather than trying to attribute our effect to that ultimate outcome. So we have a root definition and a kind of ought to be model for what we're trying to do. Typically in root definitions it's quite long. We must find a way of making these shorter. But we're basically talking about a transformation, using the CAT word, to think about transformation. What is the transformation we're trying to do within the process, not of the policy committee itself, but of the process of trying to understand impact. So we've zoomed it into saying we want to turn unassessed impact into assessed impact. So it may be having some effect, we just don't know what it is, so we need to assess it. So that's the transformation, is to turn that unassessed into assessed. So we have this, so we're developing this system that is owned by, so the owners are the IES, the actors are the policy team and the external policy advisory committee, who then assess the impact of the policy work, so that's the transformation, on behalf of the board and the management and the members, because they're the owners, because the worldview is that we think that policy impact will, if we have a clearer view of policy impact, it'll improve the impact and so better achieve the institution's missions. And then it's subject to these constraints, time, skills, ways of working and complexity of the environment we face. So that is quite a messy, and some people in the room have already seen this and already commented on it, which very helpfully, and it's evolved ever so slightly since. And we have an ought to be model, which really is quite different to the as is. But we, just to pick up what Ray said, we try to act as if this were true, which is not always easy to do. But the idea is that we would collect, aggregate, make sense of credible and relevant evidence of impacts across projects, across programs, and across the portfolio, learning from those insights and demonstrating that impact, and therefore be able to improve our effectiveness. So that's the kind of model we're trying to work to. So far, this is as of July. I haven't spoken to the team since. There's been summer breaks and everything. We can see that this is what we've heard in terms of what the policy work generally, broadly speaking. Externally, we've heard of, that it's been helpful. Other institutions and people in government have come back and said, yeah, your work has certainly been helpful to us. It's additive. It's kind of adding to other voices out there. It's not necessarily multiplying them, but it's additive. But it is patchy. It's it's having effect in some areas of environmental policy, but not necessarily others. It varies and these vary really by the type of policy work we're doing. As I say, from information dissemination into policy arenas through to kind of, as I said, lobbying in Westminster and elsewhere, and also varied by the the level of the person with whom we're trying to have influence. So trying to influence ministers and their requisite priority that they have in their worlds is quite a different thing than if you're trying to work more with officials inside the policy arena. Internally, within the IS itself, it has been broadly adopted. The policy work we've done has become embedded within, so the IS with its very large membership is kind of self-organised itself into a number of communities. Some of which are topic-based, some of which are thematic, some of which are kind of process-based. But the idea of the policy committee is that we've produced an overarching suite of policy statements which kind of came from the bottom up, but we've synthesised it, which then creates a set of standing policy positions for the institution, which they would then go and use in their own policy advocacy in their own particular thematic areas. So that's been broadly adopted by them. Again, they've seen it as being very helpful, certainly been appreciated by the members. Again, people are really pleased that we're doing what we're doing. And it certainly has been valued, and people can see the value of what they're doing and wish us to continue. But again, the depth to which the work has become embedded, and the work to the extent to which it's actually been used and continually used by other parts of the institution is quite variable. And how we think that kind of internal-external relationship thing actually is progressing or not is pretty unclear at the moment, except that we kind of know that the policy team and their direct relationships with ministers, other institutions, etc., we can get quite direct evidence of. But given the variety inside the organisation and what they're doing in their policy areas, it becomes a bit more difficult to understand that. So that's the kind of messiness that we're facing. This is a journey we're on, very much so. Where we're going next, well, what we've already done actually is the policy team has recognised that they're kind of working to a KPI almost of just being busy and having a programme of work that was just full of activity. And we've kind of said to them, well, you kind of need a bit more time to spend thinking about impact, and focus the work on things you think are going to have more impact, and spend more time finding out whether it's had impact or not, because just being busy isn't enough. So the policy programme itself, we've rejigged that, made more time and space in that for thinking about impact. We absolutely want to build impact assessment as a shared learning process. It's not something that the team want to do or the committee wants to oversee, that is done to other people. We're not going to just be knocking on doors and asking for data, give us data. So we really need to engage more internally and externally to get both that feedback, but also feed forward about what would you like us to do, how would you like us to improve as well, not just think about have we done well, and really start to be a bit more clear about how we're identifying impact. So again, the degree of contribution. I put REF in here for those UK academics in the room who might balk somewhat at reference to the REF. But the REF is the Research Excellence Framework. It's a periodic navel gazing, would you call it that? I don't know. A periodic exercise in which the academic community assesses itself. And it assesses itself on the basis of the excellence of the research, the impact it has, and the environment in which research is undertaken. And they consider impact in relation to these two criteria, reach and significance, and it's an inclusive and. They're not assessed separately, like what reach did you have and how significant have you been. It is together. So whatever reach you're attempting to have you had significance in it? So a lot of academics kind of misread this and say, we can only be really good at impact if we're influencing the United Nations and it's changing everything at the United Nations level, whereas actually there's been some absolutely brilliant impact where academics have worked quite closely with local communities and had an amazingly significant impact within those communities. But as long as they claim that's what they're claiming, so a lot of it is down to what impact are you seeking to identify and what you're seeking to actually assess. So there's a kind of boundary issue there. There's the speed and depth impact can have. It can range from being rapid and substantive. Somebody writes something or publishes something or says something, and immediately government goes, oh, that's terrible, we must do something about it. And then suddenly the policy changes to really quite a long-term or atmospheric change. You know, it just adds to the milieu out there. The value, impact is based on whether people value it or not, and that can be different for different groups. So members of the institution itself, policymakers we're trying to influence, partner organisations we're working with, will all see it differently. And picking up the critical realist evaluation thing, thinking about this notion of, so people come across this notion of CMOCs, the configurations of context, mechanisms that lead to outcomes. So how is it that what you're doing in the context you're working it actually leads to these outcomes, and think about the configurations in which that's happening. Got a little heading here called compost and cake, which you might be wondering about. Compost is because what we're trying to do is cultivate the conditions for influence, because sometimes often policy doesn't change because someone's written a new report and it lands. You've got to prepare the ground to start with, so you kind of need to put the compost in. But also, as we heard yesterday, there is no recipe for it. But what we can do is mix the ingredients for success. We can understand what it is that leads to you being more or less likely to be successful, and make sure you mix those ingredients. And then we want to make sure we use all this learning to align future priorities for the policy programme and the timing of that within the IES strategy, and also inform the next strategy, which will start the process of next year in developing the next strategy for the institution. So that's where we're going next with it. I want to leave you with a few thoughts about what we might like to think about or discuss, and also leave you with my contact details if you want to get in touch. So I'm really interested in people's experience in the room of trying to do something similar, of trying to work to understand impact in a complex, densely populated and dynamic ecosystem, really picking up, sorry, Martin's in the room, I have to say thank you for the paper, the 20 paper, with Ray and others, and this notion of the juggling metaphor, absolutely brilliant, really helpful. How can we do that better? Really making sure we can clarify what are the interrelationships we need and we're trying to create, how we kind of set the boundaries around our impact world, how we understand and make sense of the multiple perspectives and deal with the dynamics in that system. How can we go beyond just thinking of stakeholders as data points and actually work with them to, in a meaningful and ethical way, so that they aren't just subjects of our study, and really just to go into this idea of the wisdom point, from understanding what impact we're having to understanding, well, so what of it? What does that mean? What does it mean for us now? And then what might we do afterwards? And then actually, ultimately, although it's the IES is creating this impact framework for itself to demonstrate its worth to its own members, it's actually because we're in this ecosystem, we want to work towards a more community-owned framework so the whole community can understand the impact it's having. So that's really what I wanted to talk about and leave you with some questions. As I said, others' thoughts, suggestions or offers, if anybody wishes to come on this journey, would be very, very welcome, and that's my contact details.
Thank you, Gary.
All right.
So,
are you doing questions now, or are you picking them up at the end? Or?
Well, I'm going to partly throw this out to the audience because you've actually, by my watch, it's 6 minutes before Kevin's slot is due to start.
Oh, lovely.
So, if everybody's happy, if we want to have a few questions specifically to Gary as he's got a question slide, we can run till 25 past. Kevin, I'm quite happy for you to come and have the chair if you don't want to be stood out in the corridor.
I spent my life in the corridor.
Well, yeah, come and have a bit of variety.
Yes,
we can
it's nice to have been such an attractor, strange attractor, I would say.
Yeah, so do people want to respond to Gary's questions?
Or raise other points?
Just really, you said requisite variety and the way it's approached or used I think he said different for the ministers and politicians to the civil servants.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Which sounded like a really interesting statement. And I wondered if you could just, fill it in a bit. I mean,
Oh, okay.
In what
all right.
way?
Yes. All right. Okay. So the way that the policy inside a government department works is that you'll have a policy manager who's responsible for an area of policy, and so they have to work with and understand stakeholders within that area of policy. And as you will have heard millions of times, and so many people have called for, we must break out of our silos. Well, we don't, and we probably never will. But the point is that there is a requisite variety going on in that policy silo, like in air quality. They don't talk to the people involved, say, in agriculture. Yet there is a link between them because ozone causes damage to agricultural crops. When it gets to the minister has a requisite variety, which is the entire span of the responsibilities of their department. And they also have a whole different level of different kind of stakeholders to deal with. They'll have the president of the National Farmers Union at one end and car manufacturers at the other, all lobbying him, big time. So that's kind of where it works, just because they've got this both this siloisation and also this kind of hierarchy that's going on. Yep. Hi.
Hi. Could you clarify when you speak of impact assessment with regards to methodology? I would think of impact assessment as a way to provide evidence for attribution, possibly, or do you use methodologies to rather bring more evidence of contribution?
Yes, that's exactly one of the points we're making. We've abandoned the attribution idea. We do not think that's going to be feasible.
Yeah.
So it's about assessing our contribution to impact, if you like, impact contribution assessment, if you like. Yeah, very much so.
It's arguably more honest.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
We've got two.
Yes.
I saw a hand further back, and then I saw Robin, if that's okay.
That me?
Yes.
You said that there was a misunderstanding around this reach and impact.
Yes.
Have you thought of, if there's a misunderstanding, rephrasing that?
Well, it's not up to me to rephrase it. That is what the Research Excellence Framework requires. That's the rules. So,
Creative interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, that it's also why I use put EG in front of it, because it wouldn't necessarily be the phrasing we would use. But the point is, it's about saying we are claiming a particular impact or contribution to an impact, and we need to be able to show evidence that that is what has happened within the scope of the reach that we're trying to achieve and how significant it has been. Yeah, so although the phrase is not my phrase, but the idea behind it, I think, is quite sound.
Some frameworks we just have to work with as they stand. Robin?
Given the range of stakeholders you've got to manage here, what systemic tools or methods are you going to be using to do that?
That's a very good question, Robin. Thank you so much. Very good question, he says, padding it out while he thinks of an answer. I've got 2 minutes. We have already started with SSM, as you see. We've got the root definition, we've got a model. We need to socialise that. We need to do some rich picturing around that, to really do some CSH around the boundaries of all of this stuff, and really see what's feasible and what's knowable and what's ethical using CSH. We recognise VSM as a possible way of getting involved with this, particularly thinking about the hierarchical levels idea and the different parts of both internally within the institution. As I said, you've got these communities, you've got the committee, you've got the board. They're all doing this they're all thinking about this kind of thing. So we haven't quite determined what methodologies we want to pursue yet.